Welcome, traveler of dreams. Tonight's video features a chilling compilation of the most terrifying stories to set the perfect mood for Halloween. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future horror stories like these. Also, let me know where you are watching from, so go ahead and leave a comment. Let's begin. October 31st, 2016 was meant to be an easy night to earn a bit of extra money. I was 19, midway through my second year at the community college nearby, and babysitting for the Brenners had become my usual weekend job. They lived in one of those calm suburban streets where the biggest excitement was someone forgetting garbage day. Mr. and Mrs. Brenner were off to some corporate Halloween event downtown, leaving me to watch their two kids, Jacob, who was 8, and little Lila, barely 5. The pay was solid, $50 plus whatever leftovers I could find in the fridge, and the kids were typically asleep by 9. I remember thinking it'd be the easiest money I'd ever make. Just me, a quiet house, Netflix, and a few rounds of trick-or-treaters. The Brenners left around 7:30, with Mrs. Brenner doing that nervous parent routine, scribbling down half a dozen phone numbers, even though I already had her contacts saved. The kids were buzzing with sugar from the Halloween package their grandmother had sent. Jacob wore a superhero outfit I didn't recognize, and Lila was a glittery princess whose plastic tiara wouldn't stay put. Eventually, I lured them to the couch with the promise of watching Hocus Pocus. For a while, everything was perfectly normal. Waves of kids came by in costumes, their parents standing under the streetlights with flashlights, the air alive with laughter. It actually made me nostalgic for when Halloween was simple fun, before it became overshadowed by deadlines and grown-up stress. By 9, both kids were in pajamas, tucked into Jacob's room since Lila refused to sleep alone on spooky nights. That's when I noticed someone outside, a figure dressed as a clown standing at the edge of the yard where the Brenner's grass met the sidewalk. At first I brushed it off. It was Halloween after all. Creepy clowns weren't exactly rare that year, but this one wasn't part of any group. No candy bucket, no kids nearby. He was just standing there. The costume itself felt off, plain, white, slightly stains, with large buttons running down the front. The mask looked wrong. Even from the window I could tell it wasn't store-bought. The proportions were distorted, the painted grin stretched too far, the red faded to a dull muddy brown beneath the streetlight. At 9:15, I texted my boyfriend Eric. "There's a clown outside this house, just standing there." Typical of him, he called instead of replying by text. I whispered into the phone, even though the kids were asleep upstairs. Eric told me to call the police if the guy didn't leave, but it felt ridiculous to report someone just standing on a sidewalk in costume. As we talked, I wandered through the house, checking the windows. That's when I realized he wasn't staying in one spot anymore. He was moving, slowly circling the house, keeping an exact distance from the walls as though walking an invisible perimeter. Every window I looked out of, I caught a glimpse of him passing by, the mask slightly tilted toward the house, never facing it directly. Eric stayed on the line for another 20 minutes while the clown made 3 full loops around the property. I started timing them about 6 minutes each. The neighborhood was getting quieter now, just a few late trick-or-treaters roaming around, none of them reacting to the clown. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, maybe some weird neighborhood performance thing, but the way he moved, steady, mechanical, deliberate, made my stomach clench. I decided to test something. I turned off the porch light, the universal sign for no more candy. He froze for about 10 seconds, then resumed walking, same pace as before. By 9:45, fear was setting in for real. I double-checked all the locks, drew every curtain except a small gap where I could watch him, and stationed myself in the kitchen where both doors were visible. Eric kept talking, trying to calm me down, suggesting maybe the guy was drunk or high. But then I saw something that made me gasp. The clown was holding a phone, not scrolling or calling, but filming. He was recording the house, the screen casting a faint blue glow over his chin. My first thought was the kids' room upstairs, facing the street. I sprinted up to make sure their curtains were closed. Both of them were asleep. Jacob sprawled out, Layla tucked into his side. For a second I just stood there listening to them breathe, wondering if I should wake them, then decided it'd only scare them more. When I got back to the kitchen, Eric was practically yelling into the phone because I'd gone silent too long. I told him about the filming, and he immediately said he was coming over. He only lived 15 minutes away, and while that gave me a wave of relief, it also made the situation feel suddenly real. I repeated the address and went back to the kitchen window. The clown had changed his behavior. Instead of a continuous circle, he now stopped at each corner of the house for exactly 30 seconds before moving again, turning his head slowly left to right, phone always raised. At 10:13, everything spiraled. I remember the time because I was texting Eric, asking how close he was, and he said he'd park down the street so as not to provoke the clown. I was typing, "Please hurry," when I heard a door open. The basement door, not the one outside, but the interior one that led to the hallway by the bathroom. I froze. The Brenners had mentioned that latch sticking sometimes, but I hadn't been near the basement all night. I gripped my phone and grabbed a knife from the drawer, barely realizing I'd done it. Footsteps echoed from below. Slow, deliberate, not sneaky but controlled. They stopped at the bottom of the main stairs, right under the kids' room. I dropped my phone on the counter, it clattered loudly, and I bolted. My socks slipped on the hardwood as I turned the corner, the sound of footsteps following, faster now, climbing. I slammed Jacob's bedroom door shut and locked it, fumbling the latch. The noise woke both kids. Leela started crying as I pulled them into the closet, whispering it was a Halloween hiding game and we had to be completely silent. Jacob's wide eyes told me he knew better, but he held his sister close without a word. Through the thin closet door, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow again, stopping at each door. The handle of Jacob's door rattled twice, then nothing, just harsh breathing from the other side, long and rasping, drawn out like they wanted me to hear it. Minutes crawled by until I heard Eric shouting my name from downstairs, saying the front door was wide open. The footsteps in the hallway broke into a run. Eric yelled something I couldn't make out, followed by a heavy crash, furniture toppling, glass shattering. I wanted to rush out, but Lila clung to me and Jacob whispered, "Don't go. Please don't go." More noise downstairs, then fading, Eric's voice chasing someone outside, then silence. A dead, suffocating silence. We stayed hidden for 15 more minutes until sirens approached, red and blue lights flashing through the bedroom curtains. I carried Leela, Jacob clutching my shirt, and we crept downstairs. The living room was in shambles. 2 officers were there, Eric sitting on the couch with blood under his nose, but no sign of anyone in costume. The police swept the whole block that night, but never found the clown. Eric told them he'd chased him through the backyard into the woods, but lost him in the dark. The real horror came when they inspected the basement. The exterior lock had been picked. Muddy footprints showed someone had been living down there, possibly since before I arrived. They found my phone on the counter, still recording a video I didn't remember starting. When they played it back, it captured me talking to Eric, the basement door opening, my running footsteps, then 4 minutes of breathing, raspy, identical to what I'd heard behind the bedroom door. The Brenners came home to a house swarming with police. Mrs. Brenner clutched her kids, sobbing. Mr. Brenner kept apologizing over and over as if any of it were his fault. They moved out 3 months later, unable to stay in that house. For years, I had nightmares about that mask, those endless circles around the house, wondering what might have happened if Eric hadn't shown up. I moved away for university, tried to bury the memory, but every Halloween it returned. Then 2 years ago, Eric called. He still lived in our hometown and had just bought a place about 6 blocks from the old Brenner house. While digging in his backyard for a new pool, his shovel struck something solid about 3 feet down, a plastic-wrapped bundle sealed with duct tape. Inside was the same clown mask, its stretched grin unmistakable, along with a white jumpsuit and something else, a notebook. The pages were filled with addresses, dates, and disturbing observations about neighborhood families. The Brenner's address was there, alongside notes about their routine, the kids' names, my name, the times I arrived and left. But the most chilling part was that while my entry was from 2016, the newest ones were from just weeks before Eric found it. Someone had still been out there, wearing that mask, keeping watch, taking notes. The police confiscated everything, but the person who buried it was never identified. Eric sold the house within a month, not even waiting for a decent offer. We don't talk about it anymore, but every Halloween we send each other a quick text, just to make sure we're both safe, both alive, both far from any windows where someone might be pacing slow circles outside, recording, waiting for the right moment to test a basement door. Halloween night of 2022 became the night that altered everything for me. I was in my final year at the State University, majoring in journalism, and had been writing stories for the campus newspaper since I was a freshman. That October evening began as any other during Halloween weekend, costume parties raging everywhere, intoxicated students roaming the streets downtown, the typical chaos. I hadn't even been scheduled to work, but our main photographer, Eric, called out sick at the last minute. The editor reached out and asked if I could cover the huge Halloween event at the Chamber, a popular nightclub built inside an old bank near campus. I grabbed my camera, threw together a half-hearted vampire outfit, just fangs and a cape over my regular clothes, and headed out around 10 that night. Downtown was packed with people dressed as zombies, witches, and superheroes, each trying to outshine the other. The party was exactly what I expected: suffocating crowds, awful music, and overpriced drinks. I spent about 2 hours snapping photos of contest winners and drunk students embarrassing themselves. Sometime near midnight, I noticed a man wearing a meticulously crafted plague doctor mask. Those bird-like masks from the Middle Ages, the ones doctors supposedly wore during the plague. But this one wasn't a cheap knockoff. It looked authentic, aged leather with brass fittings and glass lenses that reflected the club's strobe lights in a haunting way. He was tall, probably around 6'2", and wore a long black coat that looked far too heavy for such a warm October night. What struck me most was how the crowd reacted to him. Everyone unconsciously shifted out of his path, forming an unnatural pocket of space around him, something that felt out of place in a club that crowded. I lifted my camera to capture the moment, but when I looked through the lens, he was already staring straight at me through those dark glass eyes. I lowered my camera, and he was gone, vanished into the crowd like smoke. That should have been my first warning, but I dismissed it. People disappear quickly in clubs. I continued taking pictures for another hour before running into my roommate, Lucas, who was dressed as some anime character I couldn't identify. He was completely wasted, swaying on his feet while his girlfriend Claire tried to convince him to leave. She asked if I could help her get him back to our apartment since it was on my route home. Between the two of us, we half-carried Lucas out of the club around 1:30 a.m., his arms slung over our shoulders while he mumbled about wanting pizza. Downtown was still buzzing, but as we turned onto Riverbend Avenue, the crowds thinned. That's when I saw the plague doctor again, standing beneath a streetlight about a block ahead, perfectly still, facing us. Claire noticed him too, and joked about how Halloween always brought out the creeps, but something about his posture unsettled me. We decided to take a detour down Kingman Street, a dim shortcut through the older section of downtown where many streetlights hadn't been fixed in years. The darkness was heavier than usual. Several lamps flickered out completely, leaving patches of deep shadow stretching across the cracked pavement. Lucas had gone silent, his head drooping forward as we dragged him along. Halfway down the block, Claire's phone rang. It was her sister checking that she was safe. She let go of Lucas to answer, forcing me to grab him with both hands to keep him upright. That's when I heard it, the steady thump of footsteps behind us, deliberate and slow, echoing off the concrete. I turned and there he was again, the plague doctor, about 30 feet away, pacing toward us with unhurried purpose. I told Claire we needed to move, but she was still on the phone, distracted. That's when Lucas vomited, splattering beer and half-digested food across his costume and my shoes. The smell hit instantly, sour and heavy. Claire finally hung up, panicking over Lucas's state. We leaned him against the side of an old brick print shop that had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up and covered in graffiti I recognized from campus walls. I kept glancing down the street, but the masked man had stopped walking. He stood exactly 30 feet away, motionless, patient. It was that patience that unnerved me most. He wasn't approaching or retreating, just waiting. The broken streetlight above him barely revealed his outline, but the glass lenses of his mask still caught faint traces of light, glowing like two unblinking eyes. Claire rummaged through her purse, looking for tissues to wipe Lucas off. That's when we heard voices, laughter coming from the far end of Kingman Street. A group of people appeared, singing and joking, likely on their way home from another party. Relief washed over me because witnesses meant safety, right? But as they drew closer, I noticed each wore a mask, a wolf, a hockey mask, a distorted melted face, and another plague doctor mask, though cheaper, almost plastic-looking. They passed without acknowledging us, despite Lucas groaning against the wall and Claire shouting at him to drink water. The group moved past us like we weren't even there, their laughter fading as if carried away by the wind. When I turned back, the original plague doctor was closer, only about 15 feet now, and two more figures had joined him. Both wore equally elaborate masks, one a porcelain doll face with cracks down the cheeks, the other some demonic thing with curved horns. That's when panic set in for real. I hooked my arms under Lucas's shoulders and started dragging him while Claire demanded to know what was wrong. I couldn't explain. 3 masked people were following, closing the distance with every step. Lucas's weight slowed us, each step a struggle. When we reached the end of Kingman, it opened onto Wellington Boulevard, usually a busy intersection with constant traffic, but that night the street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, nothing but our breathing and Lucas's incoherent muttering. The traffic lights still cycled from green to yellow to red, their glow shifting across vacant asphalt with no one to direct. Then the footsteps returned, multiple pairs this time, echoing closer. Claire turned around and saw them. Her scream shattered the stillness. We tried to run, dragging Lucas between us, but he was dead weight. We made it only half a block before he collapsed completely. The masked group fanned out behind us, forming a slow-moving semicircle. More figures emerged from the alleys ahead, dozens now, each wearing different grotesque masks, a cracked doll missing one eye, a leather face with zippers for features, one resembling peeled muscle and sinew. They moved in eerie synchronization, as if rehearsed. Claire sobbed, begging them to leave us alone, offering her phone, money, anything. They didn't speak, only the steady rhythm of their boots filled the silence. The original plague doctor raised a gloved hand and pointed at Lucas, curling his fingers in a beckoning gesture. The meaning was unmistakable. They wanted him. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and hit record. Maybe evidence would make someone believe this later. Through the screen, what I saw made my breath falter. Lucas's face was gone. In its place was a smooth expanse of flesh where his features should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank skin. Claire saw the screen and screamed again, pure terror mixed with disbelief. But when I looked directly at Lucas without the phone, his face was normal, pale and drunken, but still there. I looked back at the phone, blank again. The masked figures froze, as if waiting for us to grasp something. I switched to the front camera and my surroundings changed. Behind Claire and me, the street on the screen wasn't Kingman anymore. We were standing in what looked like a derelict warehouse, all rusted metal and industrial machinery. The plague doctor tilted his head, almost amused, before slowly removing his mask. Underneath was a regular man, maybe late 20s, unshaven, exhausted eyes. One by one, the rest followed, unmasking themselves, ordinary people of different ages and backgrounds, each wearing the same tired, sorrowful expression. The plague doctor finally spoke, his voice raspy from disuse. "He's already gone," he said. "Has been since you left the club. What you're holding isn't him, it's an echo, and it's drawing them to you. Every Halloween, the echoes come wearing faces, searching for people they're tied to. You can keep holding it, but it's not your friend anymore." He flipped open an old cell phone, checked the time, then added, "In about 3 minutes, that echo's going to return to where it came from. If you're still holding on when it does, you'll go too." We've tried warning people for years, but the masks, they're the only way we can see one another, the only way we can move safely where the echoes hunt. Claire was hysterical, insisting he was lying, that Lucas was right there with us. But I believed him. Something deep inside told me this was truth. The man tossed me a cheap rubber werewolf mask from a dollar store. "Put it on," he said, "and look at your friend again, then decide." Hands trembling, I pulled it over my face. Through its eye holes, Lucas wasn't human anymore. He was just a column of static like a television tuned to nothing. Humanoid in shape, but flickering, insubstantial. Where his feet touched the ground, there was only empty space. Worse, fine, translucent threads extended from the static shape into both Claire and me, looping around our wrists like fishing line. I turned toward the others. Through the mask, they weren't human either. They looked burned, melted, pieces missing, but their eyes glowed with something human, something kind. The man's distorted voice said, 60 seconds, drop it and run. Don't look back, don't go home. And no matter what, don't answer if someone calls your name. At once, Claire and I released Lucas. The static figure straightened, turned toward Kingman Street, and began walking away in perfect rhythm, mechanical and emotionless. We sprinted in the opposite direction, our footsteps slapping against pavement that suddenly felt damp though it hadn't rained earlier. Behind us, I heard the masked people scatter in separate directions, their sounds fading into silence. We didn't stop running until we reached the all-night diner on Elm Street, bright and alive with chatter and fluorescent light. Claire collapsed into a booth, sobbing, while I called 911 to report Lucas missing. They found him 3 hours later, wandering downtown in his ruined costume with no memory of anything after midnight. He was fine, completely fine except for one detail. He claimed he'd been in Ohio the entire time, visiting his parents since fall break, and hadn't even returned to campus. Security footage from the chamber clearly showed him at the party, yet every camera that should have caught him on Kingman Street displayed nothing but static between 1:47 and 1:50 a.m. When I developed my camera film the next day, every photo I'd taken of the plague doctor showed a different face beneath the mask, and in each frame's background there was always someone else wearing an ordinary Halloween mask, silently watching. I had been counting the days to escape my small hometown since junior year, so finally arriving at Westview University felt like crossing into an entirely new existence. I'd been there barely 2 months when Halloween came around, and I was still that lonely freshman who usually ate in silence at the far corner of the dining hall. My roommate had gone home for the weekend, leaving me with a mountain of assignments and a bag of mini Snickers I'd bought as my own treat. That afternoon, October 31st, I was holed up in the library, struggling to focus on my psychology notes, when 3 girls from my English Lit class approached my table. We'd been in a group project together a few weeks earlier, but I wouldn't have called us friends, more like those casual acquaintances who exchange quick smiles when passing on campus. The one who took charge was Natalie, a bubbly blonde who somehow managed to look like she had stepped out of a fashion ad even at 8 a.m. She leaned against the table asking if I had any plans for the night, and when I said no, her face lit up like she'd been waiting for that answer. She said they were heading to this invite-only Halloween party at a house just off campus. The host had asked them to bring more guests because several had backed out last minute. The other 2 girls, who I was pretty sure were named Riley and Tessa, though I couldn't remember exactly, nodded along behind her. Natalie pulled up the address on her phone, 8942 Crestwood Lane, around 15 minutes away, and told me to show up at 9. Costumes were optional since it was last minute. I remember feeling a sudden spark of excitement, like maybe this would be the moment I stopped being an outsider and finally got included in the college social world I'd been watching from the sidelines. Around 4 that afternoon, I left the library and started heading toward my dorm when I noticed a guy walking behind me. He wore a gray hoodie pulled up over his head, dark jeans, and a pair of faded red sneakers that squeaked every few steps. At first, I didn't think much of it. Campus was always busy, but when I made a detour through the student union to grab coffee, I spotted him again 20 minutes later, about 30 feet behind me. Same shoes, same slow slouched walk like he was trying to shrink into himself. I slipped into the campus bookstore and pretended to browse through sweatshirts and mugs, keeping one eye on the entrance. He never came inside. When I finally walked back out, he was gone. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just coincidence. Later, I spent way too long getting ready for the party, changing outfits 3 times before landing on black jeans and an old vintage band shirt from a thrift store. It looked casual enough to not seem desperate, but still decent for a party. The Uber driver had trouble finding the house, driving up and down Crestwood twice before finally spotting the numbers, half hidden behind an overgrown hedge. The place looked like one of those modern magazine homes, sharp angles, all glass, with automatic lights that clicked on as I walked up the driveway. Music pulsed faintly inside, but the windows were covered with thick blackout curtains, not a single sliver of light showing through. I saw what I thought was Natalie's white BMW parked outside, same model, same sorority decal, so I paid the driver and walked up to the door. Before I could knock, it swung open, and there was Tessa, wearing cat ears and holding a red cup, smiling wide though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Inside, the music was playing low, just enough to break the silence, and only about a dozen people were scattered around the living room. Not the wild party I'd imagined. Natalie waved from across the room, chatting with a guy I didn't recognize, while Riley was nowhere in sight. The house had that sterile, impersonal vibe, generic framed art, beige furniture, nothing that made it feel lived in. Tessa handed me a drink before I could ask for one, something pink, syrupy sweet, burning my throat, and started introducing me to people whose names I instantly forgot because all I could think about was how their eyes lingered on me without fully meeting mine. And that's when I noticed him, the guy from earlier, standing in the kitchen peeling the label off a beer bottle. Same gray hoodie, same red sneakers. Even across the room, I recognized him instantly. My entire body went cold, and I must have made a sound because Tessa grabbed my arm, asking if I was okay, her fingers pressing into my skin. I tried to ask casually who he was, and she frowned, saying his name was Derek, Natalie's cousin from out of town who'd shown up last minute. But that didn't make sense. When we'd worked on that English project, Natalie had spent half the time complaining about being an only child with no cousins, just her and her divorced parents. I excused myself, saying I needed the bathroom. Tessa's hand lingered on my arm longer than necessary before pointing me down a dark hallway, saying it was the last door on the right. The hallway was dim, only one flickering bulb near the end. I passed 3 closed doors before finding the bathroom, locking it immediately behind me. I tried calling my roommate, but there was no signal, not even one bar, which was impossible since we were still in the city. I checked for Wi-Fi, but the only network showing was a random string of letters and numbers. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I splashed water on my face and stared into the mirror. Something looked off. The reflection was darker than it should have been, flat, almost tinted. It reminded me of those two-way mirrors you see in interrogation rooms. I pressed my face close to the glass, cupped my hands around my eyes, and for a split second I swore I saw the faint outline of another room behind it. That's when I heard footsteps stop right outside the door. The handle rattled once, twice. Everything okay in there? A man's voice, not Derek's. Someone else. The handle jiggled again, harder this time, followed by the sound of keys. Why would anyone have keys to a bathroom at a party? I scanned the room for any possible weapon, but the cabinet only held cleaning supplies and toilet paper. Just a second, I called, trying to steady my voice. The jingling stopped, replaced by faint whispering, then fading footsteps. I waited a full minute before unlocking the door. The hallway was empty, but now all 3 of those doors I'd passed earlier were standing open, dark, empty rooms staring back. I knew I had to leave immediately, but as I started walking back toward the living room, something felt wrong. The hallway seemed longer, and there was an extra turn that hadn't been there before. The music was gone, replaced by low murmuring like a group of people reading from a script. When I finally reached the living room, everyone had moved. They were all sitting now, arranged in neat rows facing the front door, like an audience waiting for something to begin. Natalie stood when she saw me, smiling too wide, and announced to the group that I was ready. Ready for what? I tried heading for the door, but 2 large men I hadn't noticed before blocked the exit, their arms crossed. Derek had moved closer, sitting on the arm of the couch, tapping those red shoes against the floor in a slow, rhythmic beat that made my skin crawl. "Your Uber left," Natalie said, walking toward me with her phone out. "But don't worry, we arranged another ride." That's when I realized everyone else had their phones out too, pointed at me, recording. The tiny red lights of their cameras blinked in the dim light like unblinking eyes. They wanted whatever this was to be filmed. I backed up until I hit the wall, mind racing. The back door? No. 3 people stood near the kitchen. The windows? Covered. I was trapped. Natalie, Riley, and Tessa stepped forward in perfect sync, like predators circling. "We've been watching you for weeks," Natalie said, her voice flat now, stripped of that bubbly tone. "You walk the same paths, eat in the same places, sit in the same library spot. You made it easy." I did the only thing that came to mind. I grabbed a lamp beside me, a heavy ceramic pineapple-shaped one, and hurled it through the front window. The crash shattered the silence, and for a moment, everyone froze. I bolted, not through the window they expected, but straight at the 2 men guarding the door, screaming at the top of my lungs. They hesitated just long enough for me to slide between them, slam my knee into the door, and fumble the deadbolt open. I burst outside, still screaming. That saved me. The neighbors. The house next door was hosting a real Halloween party. Dozens of people came running out when they heard the glass break and me screaming. Derek froze when he saw the crowd rushing over, phones out, calling 911. I collapsed on the neighbor's driveway, sobbing, trying to explain, but I didn't need to. They could see it. the strange group still standing in the doorway, phones in hand, caught mid-act. Police arrived within minutes, and everything unraveled fast. The house was an Airbnb rented with a stolen card. None of them were students at Westview. Derek, real name Colin, had a record for assault and was breaking parole by even being there. Hidden cameras were found throughout the house, streaming live to some dark corner of the web. The detectives said it was part of a twisted pay-to-watch scheme where viewers tuned in to see staged experiences with unknowing victims. 2 other girls from different colleges had reported similar setups that month, but the culprits had always vanished before being caught. This time, their arrogance got them. They're all in prison now. I had to testify in court, which was its own private nightmare. But it's over. I made it through freshman year, though I switched dorms and changed my routes constantly now. I can't stand the sound of squeaky shoes. It makes me sick, and I never ever go to a party unless I know everyone there. But I'm alive. That's what counts. Sometimes survival is all you can manage, and making sure those who did this never get the chance to do it again. Halloween night in 2018 stamped itself into my memory as the evening I finally understood how exposed we can be inside the very spaces meant to protect us. I was 27 then, sharing a modest 2-bedroom rental in Brookvale, Ohio, with my girlfriend Marina. We'd been together roughly 3 years, and most days slid by in an easy rhythm. I handled claims as an insurance adjuster, she cleaned teeth as a dental hygienist, and our weeknights usually ended with us cooking simple dinners and zoning out to trashy reality TV until we fell asleep on the couch. The place itself wasn't remarkable, one of those 1970s copy-paste houses with paper-thin walls and floors that complained at every step, but it was ours for the moment. That year, Halloween landed on a Wednesday, and Marina was hyped to try a new trattoria that had just opened downtown, so we'd made reservations well ahead of time. I remember she wore a deep violet dress, saved for something special, and I'd actually pressed a button down for once, which she teased me about all evening. We left at around 6:30, right as trick-or-treaters started drifting through the neighborhood. I kept our porch light off since we wouldn't be handing out candy anyway. Dinner turned out excellent, fresh pasta, wine a notch pricier than our budget justified, and a tiramisu Marina kept insisting she would try to recreate at home. The dining room was dim and cozy, with Halloween cobwebs draped over framed photos, and our server kept messing with a pair of plastic vampire fangs that slipped whenever he talked, cracking us up each time he returned. We lingered longer than planned, until about 9:30, just enjoying each other's company without our phones or TV pulling at our attention. The drive back took around 15 minutes, and the streets were nearly empty by then. Most kids had already gone home, and the neighborhood had that eerie after-holiday lull, decorations swaying on lawns while no one was outside. Pulling into our driveway, I noticed our next-door neighbor's house was entirely dark, which struck me as odd because old Mr. Harrow usually stayed up late, blasting his cop shows. Marina hummed a tune from the restaurant soundtrack as we walked up to our door, while I rummaged for my keys and quietly considered that antacids were probably in my future after such a rich meal. The first thing to hit me when I opened the door was an odd smell. Not awful, just distinct, like a sweet cloud of cheap chocolate and sour gummies. I stepped in and flicked on the living room light, and my brain stalled trying to process what I saw. Candy wrappers were everywhere. I mean everywhere. Snickers wrappers on the coffee table, empty Kit Kat sleeves wedged in the couch cushions, a scatter of fun-sized Milky Way wrappers across the area rug, confetti for a party we hadn't thrown. For a moment I figured we'd left a window cracked and some bold raccoon had gotten inside. We'd battled them in the trash before, but then I saw the back door, the one that opened to our tiny excuse for a yard, sitting ajar by maybe 6 inches. It wasn't busted or forced, just gently open, like someone had stepped out and never clicked it shut. Marina came in behind me and gripped my arm, nails digging into my sleeve. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I told her to wait by the front and said I'd check, aiming for steady authority and hearing how thin it sounded. I moved through the living room, stepping carefully between wrappers and straining for any noise. In a house that old, every board tattled on you, and each creak under my feet made it harder to hear. The back door was unlocked. The deadbolt sat turned to open, which meant someone had undone it from inside, not pried it with force. That detail snagged in my mind because I'm careful to a fault about locking up. I knew I'd checked that door before we left. I nudged it wider with my foot and peered into the yard, but there was only darkness and the drooping shapes of our pitiful garden, mostly dead since September. The motion sensor light we'd installed in spring should have flicked on, but it didn't. Looking closer, I realized the bulb was missing, unscrewed from the socket. Suddenly the scene felt less like some dumb Halloween prank and more like something deliberately arranged. I slid the deadbolt quietly back into place, turned around, and that's when I saw it. A narrow beam of light slipping under the guest room door down the hallway. We barely used that room, just storage for Marina's old textbooks, my golf clubs I kept pretending I'd dust off, and bins of winter clothes. Its overhead light was a weak pull-chain fixture we never turned on, because there was almost never a reason to be in there. A shot of adrenaline flushed through me, sharpening my hearing, tightening every muscle like a starter's pistol was about to fire. I signaled for Marina to stay put and grabbed the heavy mag light by the back door, not for illumination but because it was the closest thing to a weapon I had. When I got within 10 feet of the guest room door, I heard it breathing. Not loud, not ragged, just a careful, steady rhythm, the sound of someone trying hard to be still. It was coming from inside. Whoever it was wasn't managing silence perfectly. I could pick up a faint whistle on each exhale, like a stuffy nose or the tail end of a run. My mind pinballed through explanations. Maybe a kid got scared and hid. Maybe a homeless person slipped in and was trying to escape the cold. Maybe someone high had wandered in without knowing where they were. Then a tiny mechanical buzz broke the pattern. A phone vibrating on silent. The breathing cut off. Whoever crouched in there had received a notification and now knew we were home and likely knew we'd heard them. The quiet that followed was worse than the breathing, because it meant they were listening for us as hard as we were listening for them. Despite my earlier warning, Marina edged closer until she stood 5 feet behind me, her phone already on the 911 screen, thumb hovering over the call. In the glow from her screen, I could see how pale she looked, jaw set, eyes wide and intent. It struck me as surreal that we were standing in our own hallway, in our own place, frightened by a door we'd walked past 1,000 times. I raised my voice, reaching for an authoritative tone that still came out shaky, and said something like, "We've already called the police. They're en route. Step out now." It was pure bluff, but I didn't have a better script. Nothing happened for maybe 10 seconds. Then movement, soft, shuffling steps, but not toward the door. The sounds angled away toward the far window. I knew that window didn't budge easily. The frame had warped, and we'd never bothered to fix it because we never used the room. That meant whoever was inside had likely entered through the back door and was now trapped unless they were ready to face us. I heard the scrape of wood against wood as someone tried to muscle the sash up. Marina whispered urgently, "Call. Actually call now." Her fingers tapped as she spoke to a dispatcher in a tight, controlled voice, giving our address and insisting the intruder was still in the house. We could literally hear them. The dispatcher told her to get out immediately, not to engage, to wait for officers outside. Marina said okay and didn't move. We both stood frozen, wedged in a brutal choice, step out and risk letting them slip away, or hold our ground and hope we box them in. The window finally gave with a split crack and slid. I made a split-second decision, charged the door, yanked it open, and smacked on the overhead light. The image burned into me as simple and stubborn. A man, maybe mid-30s, in a stained gray hoodie and sagging jeans, one leg already swung out the window. He turned and looked at me, and his face was painfully ordinary. Brown hair, patchy stubble, bruised half-moons under his eyes like he hadn't slept. Not a mask, not a movie monster, not a ranting caricature, just tired, desperate, cornered. Our eyes locked for a couple of seconds that stretched, and what rattled me most wasn't rage or threat on his face. It was disappointment, like he'd been caught doing something he already knew was wrong. Candy wrappers ringed his feet. A desk chair had been dragged to face the door, the height adjusted like he'd planted himself there, eating Halloween candy and listening to us on the other side. A half-unzipped backpack sat by the chair. Inside I could make out Marina's jewelry box and my laptop from our bedroom. He didn't say a word. He held my stare one heartbeat longer, slid his other leg through, and dropped into the yard. I heard the thud, then the frantic rattle as he climbed our chain-link fence and vanished into the alley. By the time I reached the window, the darkness between houses had already swallowed him. I shook all over, Not strictly from fear, but from a chaotic mix of adrenaline, anger, and a strange, grateful relief that he was gone and we weren't hurt. Marina stood in the doorway, still on the phone. She took in the chair facing the door and the wrappers pooled around it, and I watched her expression change as a sickening realization clicked into place. He'd been sitting there listening to us, maybe for minutes before we even knew. He could have heard us come in, heard us talk, and sat quietly, trying to decide his next move. That image felt more violating than any theft. Officers arrived roughly 6 minutes later, an older man who carried himself like he'd seen it all, and a younger woman who seemed deeply tuned in to our account. They swept room by room, checked the pried loose window, studied the back door, noted the missing bulb. The older officer, Sergeant Haynes, suggested it looked like someone had been watching our house, realized we'd gone out, and stayed inside for a substantial chunk of time, judging by the wrappers. He pointed out the intruder had eaten 20 or 30 pieces, something that took patience, and had clearly gone through our bedroom to grab my laptop. The younger officer, her tag read Romero, asked the question that made everything align. How did he get in? Was the back door unlocked when we left? I told her absolutely not. I'm meticulous about locking up. She studied the lock again with a flashlight and came back with a sober face. No prying marks, no splintered frame, no sign of force at all. Whoever entered had a key, she said. That landed like a blow. My thoughts flipped through the handful of people with access. Our landlord and his maintenance guy, Marina's sister who lived 2 hours away and had our spare for emergencies, and our friend Caleb who'd watered plants and grabbed mail when we vacationed in July and had returned the spare, or so I'd believed. I could see Marina running the same mental list, panic gathering in her eyes. Officer Romero asked us to write down every person who ever had a key, even briefly, and to call the landlord to clarify who else might have access to spares he kept. They photographed everything, bagged a few wrappers in case they found the guy and needed to place him at the scene, and handed us a case number. Haynes told us bluntly to change our locks first thing in the morning and seriously consider a security system. Before leaving, Romero mentioned there had been a recent bump in break-ins around the area over the past month, always while residents were out, typically non-violent and focused on theft. Ours, she said, was the first with the intruder still inside, and the first with no forced entry. That made us stand out lucky, if you could call it that. We didn't sleep. We dragged our dresser against the bedroom door, cranked every light on, and talked loops around every scenario. Sometime near 3 in the morning, a memory rose that made my skin go cold. When we moved in 2 years earlier, the landlord offhandedly mentioned the previous tenant had left abruptly, something about a nasty breakup, and there'd been murkiness over whether all keys had been returned. Back then it seemed like a non-issue. Now it felt crucial. At dawn, groggy and jittery, I called a locksmith before making coffee. He arrived that day and swapped out every lock, front door, back door, even the side gate. It cost nearly $400, and I didn't care. We also called Marina's sister and Caleb to confirm their keys were accounted for. Both said yes. Caleb even drove over to show me the spare, which I'd forgotten I'd taken back and hung on our key rack. The landlord was trickier to pin down, but when I got him, he admitted that at one point he'd had 6 copies and couldn't verify where every single one ended up. That infuriated me, but it also offered a grimly plausible explanation. We never learned who the man was. The police never found him. And honestly, I doubt they pushed too hard. No injuries, nothing irreplaceable gone since he dropped the bag when he bolted, and bigger cases on their desks. 3 months later, Marina and I broke our lease and moved into an apartment complex with actual security cameras in the hallways, better lighting, more eyes. We both agreed there was no way to stay in that house, not after knowing someone had sat in our guest room in the dark, eating candy and listening to us breathe on the other side of a thin door. What still gnaws at me isn't the theft or even what could have happened, it's the tableau of that chair pulled up to face the doorway, the wrappers fanned out like confetti, the realization that he lingered long enough to get comfortable. He wasn't flustered, he wasn't rushing, he waited. If we'd come home 30 minutes earlier, or if he'd chosen to walk out instead of hiding, I can't guess how it would have ended. Sometimes I wonder whether he was just some random with a stray copy, or the old tenant who never fully let us go. Either way, I check every lock twice now, every single night, and I doubt I'll ever stop. Halloween used to be the holiday I loved most. I mean, absolutely fixated. Sketching costume ideas in August, plotting the prime candy circuits, The whole obsession. I was 14 that October in 2015, living with my mom and little brother in a suburb just outside Spokane, Washington. Our street, Maple Crest Lane, was one of those postcard neighborhoods where folks remembered each other's names and swapped hedge trimmers without keeping score. Every house went hard for Halloween. Carved pumpkins, webs draped over shrubs, those inflatable ghosts that look absurd in daylight, except for one place. Number 447, about 5 doors down. A single-story ranch with weathered teal siding that belonged to a man everyone simply called Mr. Holbrook. He'd been there longer than anyone could recall, kept to himself, never stirred trouble. But here was the strange thing. Every single Halloween, without fail, he dressed up his front porch. Not extravagant, just a pair of carved pumpkins, some orange lights, a wreath on the door so it looked like he was joining in. But if you actually climbed those steps and knocked, nothing. Total quiet. The lights would be on inside. You could catch the flicker of a TV through the curtains, but he never, ever answered. Most kids learned to skip his place after trying once. It turned into an unspoken neighborhood rule. You'd watch clusters of trick-or-treaters stroll past 447 without slowing. But it always gnawed at me. Why stage the decorations if you're not passing out candy? Why make it look welcoming and then ignore everyone? My friend Nico, a wiry kid with copper hair who lived to stir things up, had this theory that Mr. Holbrook did it deliberately, like some weird mind game to mess with people. Nico's older brother Mason was 17, had his license, and thought he was impressive because he could force out a patchy beard. That October, Mason decided he'd set the old creep straight for being antisocial. He enlisted Nico, me, and this girl Lila from our grade, known for not scaring easily. The plan was simple. Dumb teenager logic. We'd hit Mr. Holbrook's on Halloween night, TP his trees, maybe smash a pumpkin, slam the doorbell a bunch of times, and bolt. Classic prank. Nothing extreme. I remember feeling uneasy even then, but I didn't want to seem spineless in front of everyone, especially Lila. So I went along. Halloween arrived with that perfect autumn bite in the air. Our neighborhood swarmed with people. Families everywhere, little kids in princess dresses clutching their parents' hands, older kids in last-second costumes. Mason scooped us up around 8:30 in his beat-to-hell Jeep Cherokee, after most of the small trick-or-treaters had headed home. Nico was practically buzzing in the passenger seat, ranting about how this was going to be legendary. Lila sat in back with me, scrolling her phone, bored look and all, but down for whatever. We parked 2 streets over and walked, rolls of toilet paper stuffed in our jacket pockets. The closer we drifted to Maple Crest, the quieter it got. Porch lights were winking off, the night's Halloween charge fading. When we reached Mr. Holbrook's, I noticed the details were identical to every other year. 2 jack-o'-lanterns on the steps, their triangle eyes burning from stubby candles, orange string lights hugging the doorway. His living room lamp was lit, and through the sheer curtains I saw the blue wash of his TV. Everything seemed normal, almost serene. That's what made Mason's next words feel so out of place. "Check that," he whispered, pointing to the roofline above the porch. At first I didn't see it. Then Lila spotted it too. A small black device tucked under the eave, angled toward the path. "Is that a camera?" she asked. We stared. It was definitely a camera. One of those compact security kinds, and it was aimed straight at the sidewalk and front walk. "Paranoid old jerk," Mason muttered, but he was grinning like it improved the thrill. Nico proposed we run the prank from the side yard instead, outside its view. We crept along the right side of the house where a tall fence divided Mr. Holbrook's place from the neighbors. It was dimmer there, just a small side window with the blinds down and a motion sensor that blessedly didn't trip. Mason started unspooling toilet paper, prepping to toss it over the fence into the front trees. That's when Nico noticed something and squeezed my arm hard enough to sting. "Dude," he hissed. "Another one." He was pointing at the corner near the foundation. A second camera, smaller than the first, tucked in the shadow where siding met concrete. This one covered the side of the house, the exact stretch we occupied. My gut nodded. Why post cameras here? Mason tried to act unfazed, said lots of people install systems, but the cocky edge bled out of his voice. Lila wanted to leave. She kept saying it felt wrong and we should bail. But Nico, stubborn as ever, insisted we'd come too far to chicken out over a couple lenses. He started sliding toward the back, hugging the wall, and like idiots we followed. The backyard was tight, boxed by that same wooden fence, with a concrete patio and a rust-streaked grill that looked like it hadn't seen a flame in years. A sliding glass door opened into what I guessed was the kitchen, and next to it sat a regular door with a little window at the top. Everything back there was dark except one thing. Mounted at the back corner and pointed across the yard was a third camera. This one had a small red light blinking. Nico saw it the same instant I did. Nobody spoke. We just stood in the guy's yard, realizing every angle was covered. That's when Mason, desperate to patch his tough guy persona, made the dumbest move possible. He strode to the back door and knocked hard. The sound boomed in the quiet. We tensed, waiting for Mr. Halbrook to flip a porch light or bark at us to beat it, but nothing. Mason pounded again, harder, the kind of banging that wakes anyone, still nothing. "He's definitely home," Lila whispered, pointing to the TV glow, still visible through the front windows. You could even hear it faintly, a muffled ribbon of voices from whatever was playing. Mason tried the handle, locked, obviously, then cupped his hands and peered through the little window. He went still. "What?" Nico asked. "What do you see?" Mason didn't answer right away. When he finally leaned back, his face looked washed out even in the dark. "Papers," he said quietly, "like everywhere, covering the walls." Before anyone could process it, Nico shoved past and looked for himself. "Holy," he breathed. "Printouts. Photos, I think." I didn't want to look. Everything in me screamed to leave, go home, trash the whole stupid night. But curiosity is a mean hook. I pressed my face to the cold glass. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the glow spilling from another room, but it was enough. The walls were absolutely smothered with printed photographs. Hundreds, maybe thousands, layered like scales. Every visible surface was taped over in an obsessive collage that made my brain ache. From what I could make out, they were pictures of the street, our street, different hours, different seasons. I recognized Miss Darrow's flower beds from last spring, the Reyes family's car they'd sold months back, and people, kids walking to the bus stop, parents pushing strollers, teens on bikes, shot from a distance like surveillance stills. My eyes fell on one image that was closer than the others, sharper. 3 kids in Halloween costumes that looked like last year, a vampire, a witch, a skeleton. They were passing right in front of Mr. Halbrook's, probably on their way to richer candy haunts. The zoom was tight enough to show faces clearly. I knew the vampire. It was Nico's little sister, Mina. She'd been 9 last Halloween. "We need to call the police," Leela said, her voice trembling now. She had her phone out already, but before she could dial, we heard it, a sound from inside. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being dragged across the floor. Heavy, slow. We all edged back from the door at the same time. Nico yanked Mason's arm and hauled him toward the side of the house, back the way we'd entered. That's when I saw Mason staring past us. "Where's Nico?" he said. It took a second to compute. I turned. Nico was right there beside him. He'd just pulled on his arm. But Mason wasn't looking at Nico. He was staring toward the back fence. "Not Nico," Mason said, voice weird and flat. "The other kid, the one who was just by the grill." Cold flooded me. There were 4 of us. Me, Mason, Nico, and Leela. No one else. "What are you talking about?" Leela demanded, but she was scanning too, her phone's flashlight jerking. Mason insisted he'd seen someone's shorter figure in dark clothes standing by the grill when we were all peeking through the window. He'd assumed it was one of us wandering off. We blew out of that yard like our lives depended on it. I smashed my shin on the fence gate corner hard enough to see sparks, but I didn't stop. We didn't stop until we hit Mason's Jeep 2 streets away, all of us heaving, checking and checking again that it was only the 4 of us. Mason kept repeating he'd seen someone maybe 5 feet tall, dark hoodie. Nico mocked him as paranoid, said it was shadows and he'd spooked himself, but I'd seen Mason's face. He wasn't easy to rattle and he looked genuinely scrambled, like his brain couldn't reconcile what his eyes had taken in. We sat in the Jeep nearly 20 minutes arguing what to do. Lila wanted to call the cops on the spot and report the cameras and the photos. Nico worried we'd get nailed for trespassing. Mason had gone quiet, white-knuckling the wheel and staring through the glass. Finally, I pushed that we should at least tell our parents and let grown-ups handle it. We agreed to head home, and tomorrow we'd figure out the right way to report what we'd seen. Mason dropped everyone off. When I got back, my mom was watching TV in the living room. I almost spilled everything then, but the words jammed up. How do you admit you were out to vandalize someone's place and stumbled into something far worse? I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos layered and layered, so many people living their lives while being documented. The next morning, a Wednesday, my mom woke me early. Her expression was the kind that means trouble. "Did you see Nico last night?" she asked. I told her yes, we'd hung out for Halloween. She sat on my bed and took a breath. His mom just called. He never came home last night. The room tipped. I said that couldn't be right. Mason had dropped Nico at his house around 10:30, same as the rest of us. My mom said Nico's mom had waited up and he never walked in. His phone went straight to voicemail. They'd already called the police. I dressed on autopilot and my mom drove me to Nico's place, where 2 patrol cars already sat. His parents looked wrecked, his mom crying on the porch while his dad spoke to officers. They asked me when I'd last seen him, whether he'd mentioned going anywhere else, if he seemed off. I told them everything I could without outing where we'd actually been, said we were just walking the neighborhood. One officer took notes in a small pad, face politely neutral, asking about problems at home or school, the standard runaway checklist. By afternoon, I couldn't take it. I called Lila and said we had to tell someone about Mr. Halbrook's place, everything we'd seen. She'd been thinking the same. We decided to tell her older sister, who was 22 and worked as a paralegal, someone who'd know what to do. When we laid it all out, pointing to exactly where the house sat on Maplecrest, her expression went grim. She didn't scold us for trespassing. She made us repeat every detail twice, then immediately called a detective hotline she had from work. Within an hour, 6 police cars were on our street. I watched from my bedroom as officers closed in on Mr. Halbrook's place, pounding the door with that official knock. When he didn't respond, they moved around back. I couldn't see what followed, but within 30 minutes they were leading him out in cuffs. He was smaller than I'd pictured, balding, wearing a cardigan that made him look like someone's retired granddad. He wasn't fighting or shouting. He looked resigned, like he'd expected this day. More police rolled up. They started hauling boxes, computer gear, hard drives, file folders. The whole street drifted out to watch. No one could believe it. The quiet neighbor who kept to himself, arrested right there. The full story unfolded over the next days, pieced from news and gossip. Investigators found more than 30 cameras around and inside Mr. Halbrook's property, all trained on street and sidewalks. His computers held thousands upon thousands of photos and videos of neighborhood children, organized into folders by name, age, physical features. He'd been at it at least 8 years, maybe more. The cameras used motion sensors, activating whenever someone passed. He had footage of kids waiting for the bus, playing in yards, riding bikes. Nothing explicitly illegal in terms of what was captured, since it was shot from his property of public areas, but the scale and obsessive patterning were enough for charges tied to stalking and endangering minors. They also found meticulous notes, routines, favorite colors, names of friends, a surveillance apparatus, detailed enough to make intelligence pros jealous. But here's what still claws at me. They found Nico, not at Mr. Halbrook's house, and somehow that made it even worse. Nico had apparently panicked after Mason dropped him off, couldn't stop replaying those images and that figure Mason swore he saw. Instead of going inside, he'd walked back to Maplecrest alone, intending to watch the house from a distance to see if anything suspicious happened. A neighbor 2 doors down from Mr. Halbrook had a security camera that captured Nico across the street around 11 p.m., just watching the place. What it also caught roughly 15 minutes later was a van pulling up, not his vehicle, something else entirely, a white contractor van with no visible plates. 2 men got out, walked straight toward Nico. The footage was grainy and angled, but you could see Nico backing away and the men speeding up, and then Nico was gone. The van rolled off. Police traced it through other neighborhood systems and traffic cams. It led them to a house in Post Falls, Idaho, about 20 miles away. What they found there was worse than anything at Mr. Halbrook's. Turns out he hadn't been operating alone. He was part of a network, and his role was surveillance, flagging targets, charting routines, feeding information to others who committed the actual abductions. The house in Post Falls was where they took the kids. I can't write the specifics of what happened inside. I still wake up over what the reports implied. They found Nico there with 2 other children missing from different counties. Nico had been there less than 24 hours when the raid hit. He was physically okay, shattered in ways I can't describe, but alive. The timing of our discovery and report literally saved his life. If we'd waited even one more day, the end would have been different. 7 people were arrested in all, including Mr. Holbrook. The trial was huge, made national headlines for a stretch. He took a plea and got 40 years. The others got more. Nico moved away with his family about 6 months later. Couldn't stand living on that street, knowing his every movement had been cataloged for years by someone living 5 doors down. I don't blame him. I left too for college and never returned except to see my mom. She sold the house in 2023. Sometimes I replay how many times I walked past Mr. Holbrook's as a kid, oblivious. How often I was photographed, filed away, analyzed. The police told us we were fortunate that his role was only observation, that he personally never laid hands on anyone, only cleared the way for others. That doesn't redeem it. He sat in that house for years watching children, fully aware what his notes would serve. The Halloween decorations were bait, a test to see which kids would approach the door close enough for crisp facial shots. That's why he never answered. He didn't want trick-or-treaters, he wanted footage. The figure Mason saw in the backyard that night, investigators think it might have been one of Holbrook's associates checking on something, maybe watching us as we clocked the cameras. We'll probably never know. And honestly, I don't want to. What I do know is Halloween doesn't land the same. Every lit porch, every elaborate display, every neighbor I can't quite place carries extra weight now. Trust is fragile. Sometimes the monsters don't lurk in the dark. Sometimes they live 5 doors down and give a polite wave when you grab the mail. People always talk about Halloween as if it's harmless fun, costumes, candy, and kids buzzing on sugar before bed. That's exactly how the night began for me and my best friend, Ethan. We were both 13, caught between wanting to act mature and still clinging to childhood traditions like trick-or-treating. Our neighborhood, Maple Ridge, was calm and predictable, manicured lawns, flickering pumpkin lanterns, and porch lights glowing in neat rows. Before leaving, my mom gave us one rule: only take wrapped candy. We agreed, of course, then promptly ignored it the second we turned the corner. We'd been wandering for about an hour when we came upon a house that stood out. No fake cobwebs, no lights, just a single orange candle flickering on a small wooden table near the door. As we approached, an elderly woman stepped out. Her hair was snow white, twisted neatly into a bun, and she wore a hand-knitted shawl embroidered with tiny black cats along the edges. "Good evening, boys," she greeted us with a frail but kind voice. "You're my first trick-or-treaters tonight." She smiled warmly and handed us each a foil-wrapped brownie, still warm to the touch. "Homemade," she said with quiet pride. Ethan grinned and thanked her before I could respond. We didn't unwrap them right away. The foil felt a little greasy, and the smell of chocolate and cinnamon drifted through. It felt oddly intimate, like something your grandmother might make, not something from a stranger's doorstep. Ethan mentioned his aunt used to bake brownies just like that, then tore his open and took a bite. "See? Totally fine," he said, laughing. I remember hesitating, feeling the gentle heat of the brownie through the foil. It would have seemed rude not to try, so I took a few bites as we walked toward the next house. A couple of hours later, I started feeling sluggish, as though every movement dragged through thick mud. Ethan joked that we'd probably eaten too much candy, but his speech sounded thick, words slurring slightly. I remember standing in front of a yard filled with inflatable ghosts when everything started to tilt. The streetlights seemed to stretch, kids' laughter faded into muffled echoes, and I couldn't tell if I was still upright or lying down. Ethan said something, but it sounded like it came from underwater. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on my bedroom floor. My mom was hovering over me, phone pressed to her ear, panic written across her face. My mouth was bone dry, and I could barely focus my eyes. She told me she'd found me collapsed near the front door when she got home from her shift. I tried asking about Ethan, but my voice barely worked. She didn't even realize I'd gone out with him. She thought I'd been alone all evening. That's when I saw the crumpled piece of foil beside me on the carpet, and something inside clicked into place like a puzzle finally solved. The next morning, my mom said Ethan had been taken to the hospital. His parents found him unconscious in their driveway. The doctors told them we were lucky. Whatever we'd eaten had been laced with a strong sedative. When the police came to question me, I sat on the couch trying to remember every possible detail about that woman's house. The candle, her shawl, the way she'd said "you're my first trick-or-treaters tonight." I told them everything, but the more I tried to recall, the fuzzier the image became. Later that afternoon, 2 officers drove around the neighborhood with my mom and me. Everything looked as it should: carved pumpkins, spiderwebs, and strings of orange lights. But when we got to the spot where I swore that woman's house stood, there was nothing there, just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds, a faded "for sale" sign slanting in the dirt. One officer asked if I was certain, and I pointed right where the porch had been, where the candle flickered. He just nodded quietly, avoiding my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. My head ached, and I kept replaying the scene, her wrinkled hands passing us the brownies, the faint chime of her bracelets that smell of cinnamon and warm chocolate. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my window. Slow, heavy steps crunching leaves. I told myself it had to be a raccoon or maybe the wind, but the steps stopped directly beneath my window. A long, bent shadow passed across the curtain, then slowly moved away toward the street. By morning, police cars lined the block again. They discovered something behind the empty lot, a cellar entrance buried under decaying boards. Inside were shelves packed with baking supplies, rows of foil-wrapped brownies, and scattered children's costumes. One detective quietly told my mom they'd also found folded blankets, an old lantern, and a radio set to static. No one had lived there, not for years. The house had burned down a decade earlier after a gas explosion. The property had been vacant ever since. When they showed me photos from inside the cellar, one detail made my stomach turn. On one of the shelves lay a neatly folded shawl, embroidered with tiny black cats, exactly like the one she'd been wearing. The detective said they were checking for fingerprints, though his expression made it clear he didn't expect to find anything alive linked to it. They told us Ethan and I had ingested just enough of whatever was in those brownies to knock us out, not enough to kill us. Whoever or whatever that woman was, she had planned for something much worse that night. A week later, life in Maple Ridge went back to normal. Decorations came down, kids went back to school, and adults whispered about it like it was some exaggerated urban legend. But I couldn't walk past that lot without feeling cold all over. The little table with the candle was gone, yet the grass where it had stood never grew back. The ground stayed dark, scorched in a perfect circle, as if something had burned deep into the soil. Even now, years later, Halloween makes me uneasy. I never eat anything homemade, not even from people I trust. And when porch lights flicker in the distance, I sometimes hear her gentle grandmotherly voice echoing in my mind. "You're my first trick-or-treaters tonight." My mom says trauma can distort memory, that maybe I've twisted parts of what happened. But I know what I saw, I know what I tasted, and I know that somewhere out there, someone else might still be handing out those same warm, foil-wrapped brownies.